There's one night a year when the sky lets light fall over the rooftops, over the fields, over the very window you might have watched from as a little girl, counting quietly until the next one appeared. That night is August 10th. For centuries, in villages across Spain and all of Latin America, someone gave those falling lights a name: tears. The tears of a saint who died slowly in fire without a word. No one has ever explained to you why those tears keep falling every August, year after year, punctual as an appointment nobody forgets. Or why that exact date has something to do with the people you can no longer hold. That question just sits there, falling right along with you, like those lights nobody can quite stop. And there's another one underneath it, heavier still, one you may have never let yourself say out loud. What if those tears carry your own people inside them too? The ones who left, the ones you still search for in every quiet August night. Before we go on, tell me something in the comments, even just a few words. The next time you see a star fall, whose name will you whisper so quietly no one else can hear? Write it down below, because what you're about to hear runs a lot deeper than the calendar. Deep Castile understood this more than 400 years ago, and it kept it for one exact night of the year, for one person who needed it. That person is you tonight, this 10th of August, Rome, the year 258. Emperor Valerian has just signed an edict that hunts down Christians, aiming its fury especially at their leaders. On August 6th of that year, Pope Sixtus II is caught celebrating the liturgy in the catacombs and executed almost on the spot, along with several of his deacons. Among those still breathing is a man the prefect of Rome knows well. Word of him has traveled through the halls of the imperial palace. His name is Lawrence. He's barely into his 30s. He's the deacon in charge of the Church of Rome's goods, the man who knows, house by house, where every widow lives, every orphan, every old man with no family left, everyone who depends on Christian charity just to eat that night. The prefect sends for him, gives him 3 days. He wants the church's treasure, the gold, the silver, the sacred objects he imagines hidden away in some Roman cellar. He figures Lawrence, frightened, will hand it all over to save his own skin. Lawrence asks for the time, and uses it in exactly the way the prefect never saw coming. He walks Rome all night, knocking on doors, gathering the poor he's fed for years, the sick he's visited, the widows he's kept afloat with the offerings of the faithful. On the 3rd day, he brings them before the prefect, lined up across the whole plaza. This, he says, is the treasure of the church. These people are the only thing Christian Rome owns worth keeping. The prefect doesn't take it as a lesson. He takes it as an insult, and he orders a slow death for Lawrence, designed to drag the real location of the gold out of him before the end. They bring him to a room with an iron grate set over glowing coals. They tie him down. The fire starts climbing up beneath his body, while the executioners wait for him to scream, to beg, to talk. Pious tradition, passed down for centuries in the liturgy and later recorded by Saint Ambrose of Milan, says that Lawrence, in the middle of the torment, held on to a calm that unsettled the very men burning him. It isn't a detail history can verify with courtroom precision, but the church has carried it for 1700 years as a living memory of something that is true. That man died without denying his faith, without naming a single name, without ever handing over the hiding place of goods he'd already given away to the poor before the prefect had even finished making his threat. Sit with that for a second. The fire meant to destroy him, meant to tear a cry of surrender out of him, didn't get what the prefect was after. It consumed his body, yes, but it never touched what Lawrence carried inside. There's something in that scene the church has never stopped turning over, a fire that burns and still can't put out what matters most in a person. A fire that destroys the flesh and leaves the soul untouched, burning inside with a different kind of light. A light the executioner can't reach, because he doesn't even know it's there. The date was recorded with precision in Rome's oldest liturgical calendars, August 10th, the year 258. Saint Ambrose of Milan, bishop and doctor of the church, wrote about this episode barely a century later, when people who'd known direct witnesses were still alive. St. Augustine preached about Lawrence too, in several sermons that survive to this day. That rules out the idea of some late legend cooked up by pious imagination with nothing behind it. This is a memory carried for generations by some of the most rigorous theologians the early church had, handed down with the quiet care reserved only for what's genuinely held sacred. Rome buried Lawrence that same night, outside the city walls, along the Tiburtina Road. The Christians who'd survived that wave of persecution started visiting his grave almost right away. Within a few decades, a small chapel went up there. Over the centuries, that chapel grew into the Basilica of San Lorenzo fuori le mura, one of the 7 great churches of Rome, a place millions of pilgrims have walked through searching for the very thing you might be searching for right now, without quite knowing how to name it. And here's something almost no one connects. Centuries after that day in Rome, in his cell in Castile, a Carmelite nun wrote about a very different fire. Hers was another kind, one lit inside, kindled by God, in a soul that gives itself over completely, a fire that also burns, that also hurts, and that also fails to destroy what's essential in the person it touches. Saint Teresa of Jesus knew the story of Rome's martyrs. The Discalced Carmelites prayed the office for them, read their lives, venerated their relics whenever they had one to venerate. And somewhere in her own mystical experience, she described something that shares a resemblance too close to be chance or literary coincidence. What exactly, in her own words, did she describe about that inner fire that burns and never consumes? And what does that fire, one that can wound a soul without destroying it, have to do with the silent lights that still fall every August 10th over the same fields where Lawrence once walked looking for the poor of a persecuted Rome? That very specific question is still hanging open, waiting on an answer. Because before we get there, we need to understand why, centuries later, someone started calling those lights by the name of the saint who died on the grate, and why that custom never faded, not in the villages of Castile, not in the villages of the Americas, where right now, tonight, someone is looking up at the sky in that same silence you probably will too. Every year, between late July and mid-August, Earth passes through a cloud of dust and tiny debris left behind by Comet Swift-Tuttle on its orbit around the Sun. When those particles, many no bigger than a grain of sand, hit the atmosphere at tremendous speed, they burn up and leave behind a streak of light that lasts barely a second. Modern astronomy calls them the Perseids because they seem to radiate from the constellation Perseus. The show peaks right around August 10th, with dozens of streaks visible every hour on a clear, moonless night. That part science can explain down to the decimal. But long before anyone had a telescope capable of calculating a comet's orbit, farmers across Europe were already watching that August sky and counting the lights that fell. And they were doing it on the very nights surrounding the feast of a Roman deacon burned on a grate. The overlap between the date of Lawrence's martyrdom and the peak of the meteor shower didn't go unnoticed by medieval popular piety. In France, in Spain, in Italy, an expression started making the rounds. One still heard today in villages across Castile, Andalusia, Galicia, the tears of St. Lawrence. The tradition holds, without pretending to be a physics textbook, that those lights are the saint's tears falling to earth on the anniversary of his martyrdom, as if the whole sky still remembered that night in the year 258 and simply couldn't hold the emotion in. Chroniclers of popular devotion in Spain, as far back as the 19th century, wrote down this rural custom of naming August's shooting stars after the martyred saint. The same expression turns up in France, where it's known as L'Arme de Saint Laurent, and in Italy, where some villages still say Le Lacrime di San Lorenzo. Far from being some recent invention dreamed up for tourist calendars or a marketing label to sell telescopes every summer, this is oral memory that passed through generations of illiterate farmers who even so could read the sky better than plenty of astronomers today. This popular name doesn't appear in any official Vatican document, and it isn't part of what the Church teaches with authority. Worth saying plainly, because the point here is never to confuse superstition with faith. It's a piece of folk piety, born from Christian people who for centuries lived their lives close to the liturgical calendar, building their farming year and their spiritual life around the feasts of the saints. Simple people with no scientific instruments found in the August night sky an image that spoke straight to the heart. The saint who gave his life without complaint kept on, century after century, letting something fall from above. And that something, even though science explains it as cosmic dust burning up in the atmosphere, kept getting called tears. There's something deeply Catholic about this way of looking at the sky, even if it never made it into the catechism. The Catholic faith has always known how to read creation as a language. St. Paul wrote to the Romans that the invisible things of God become visible through what he has made. St. Bonaventure taught that the whole world is a book where you can read the Creator's fingerprint if you know how to look. In that sense, the Perseids don't need to literally be a martyr's tears for the name to carry real spiritual weight. Christian people with that instinctive wisdom academic theology so often takes centuries to catch up with understood there was something in those lights, falling exactly when the Church remembered Lawrence, worthy of a name spoken in grief and love. And here's what you probably never knew, the part that ties this whole tradition to the people you can no longer hold. In many villages across Spain, and later across the Americas, the night of August 10th turned, generation after generation, into a night for remembering family. Grandparents would drag a chair out to the patio or sit down on the doorstep and wait for the lights while they told stories about the ones who'd already died. Behind that simple gesture was a custom built on the belief that the sky, that one night, hung especially close to the earth. If the saint in heaven wept out of love every August 10th, those grandmothers and grandfathers reasoned, without needing a shred of formal theology, then it was a fitting night to remember your own dead, to pray for them while looking up, to feel the distance between heaven and earth shrink a little, just for that one night of the year. The custom traveled with Spanish settlers to Mexico, to Colombia, to Peru, to Guatemala, across all of Hispanic America, blending along the way with local devotions, but always keeping the same essential gesture, looking up on an August night with your heart set on the ones who are gone. In some villages it stayed almost untouched, even though many people have forgotten exactly where it came from, and just repeat the gesture because that's how they saw it done at home. The grandmother who taught you to pray might have stepped out to the patio that August night without being able to explain why. She just knew it needed to be done. She just felt, the same way her own parents and grandparents felt before her, that the sky was closer that night, more generous, more willing to hear the name of someone who's no longer here. And if that instinct people held on to for so long actually has some real spiritual grounding, if there's more than folklore underneath the tradition, then it's worth understanding what those tears really mean. Are they a sign of pain, of loss, or are they, as some of the saints who understood suffering and glory most deeply began to suspect, an expression of something entirely different from the crying you know? Why cry over the anniversary of a man who's already in heaven? This question deserves a moment of quiet, because it touches something you may have felt yourself without ever putting a name to it. When you think of your own dead, when the anniversary of their death comes around, do you cry because you're still suffering? Or is there another reason underneath it that doesn't quite fit the word pain? The Church teaches with total clarity that Lawrence is in heaven. His feast is celebrated every August 10th precisely because the Christian community venerates him as a glorified martyr, someone who already enjoys the presence of God face to face. So what could it possibly mean for heaven to weep over someone who no longer suffers, who no longer needs anyone's pity, who's already reached exactly what every Christian life is aiming for? There's an easy answer and a deeper one. The easy one says, the tears of St. Lawrence is just folk poetry, a pretty way of naming an astronomical event with no real theological weight behind it. And it may well have a point. But there's something in that expression that plain, everyday piety sensed without ever being able to spell it out. Something reaching into a very old corner of Christian spirituality. The certainty that some tears come from an overflow of love rather than from loss. A love the human body doesn't always know how else to hold. Think about a mother crying on her daughter's wedding day. That crying comes from a heart so full it can't help spilling over. Think about the tears that show up sometimes in front of something beautiful. A sunset, a piece of music that reaches somewhere very deep, the face of a newborn. No one would say those tears are about pain. They're about an intensity ordinary language just can't reach any other way. Christian spiritual tradition knows this kind of crying well and has had a name for it for centuries, the gift of tears. The Desert Fathers were already talking about this in Christianity's earliest centuries. St. John Climacus, in his Ladder of Divine Ascent, describes a kind of weeping that purifies, that soothes, that comes alongside deep prayer without dragging despair along with it. It's the weeping of someone who, for one instant, touches something that overwhelms them, something too big for the human heart to hold, and finds in tears the only way out available. Medieval mystics called this phenomenon compunction, a harsh-sounding word for something tender, a heart pierced by God's nearness, wounded by a love that looks almost nothing like ordinary pain. St. Thomas Aquinas, in the Summa Theologiae, spent entire sections explaining why the passions of the soul, weeping included, are natural movements of the human heart, capable of being ordered toward the highest good when they respond to something genuinely worthy of love. A far cry from being flaws you need to strong-arm out of yourself. Tears that come from contemplating a martyr's sacrifice, or from remembering a father, a mother, a husband who's no longer here, fit that description perfectly. Nothing in the Catholic faith asks you to hold those tears back, out of fear of looking weak. Just the opposite. Spiritual tradition treats them, almost without exception, as a grace, a gift, something God grants, not something a believer should ever feel ashamed of feeling. Now go back to Lawrence, burned alive on a Roman grate without ever denying his faith. Think about the intensity behind that kind of surrender. Think about what it meant for him in that final moment to know he'd given everything, absolutely everything, holding nothing back, not even the natural fear of extreme pain. If there's a love strong enough to hold a man steady through something like that, it's a love with an intensity the human body can barely contain without it spilling out somewhere. Popular piety, with no idea how to name the theology of the gift of tears, sensed that this love kept falling century after century, as if the whole sky still couldn't hold what it felt that night in the year 258. And here's the part that might land closest to home tonight, this August 10th. If the deepest tears often come from love overflowing rather than from loss itself, then the tears you shed for your own dead deserve to be seen in a different light. How many times have you cried for someone you loved and felt guilty about still crying years later, as if those tears were some kind of failure, some lack of faith, some sign you don't trust enough that the person is okay? Church tradition teaches something far gentler than that. Crying for the dead, when that crying comes from love, can be the most honest proof there is that the love is still alive, still overflowing, still looking for a way out. There's still something important to work through, before this question can be answered with real certainty and not just pious intuitions. Because there was a woman, a real woman in Castile, centuries after Lawrence's martyrdom, who wrote in detail and with remarkable precision about this exact same kind of weeping, something very few saints in the Church's history managed to describe with such clarity. She wasn't talking about shooting stars. She was talking about what happens inside a soul when it touches the presence of God up close and can no longer hold in what it feels. And what she wrote has everything to do with the question sitting with you right now, in the dark of your own home. What exactly are those tears that fall when the love behind them turns out to be too much for the fragile, limited body trying to hold it that night without quite managing to? It was in Avila in the 1560s that Saint Teresa of Jesus began putting into writing, at her confessor's request, the experience of prayer she'd been living quietly inside her cell for years. In the book of her life, she describes, with a level of detail rare for the mystical literature of her time, the different stages of prayer, comparing them to different ways of watering a garden. And when she gets to one of those stages, what she calls the prayer of quiet, she describes something that closely echoes what the Desert Fathers had named centuries earlier with the word compunction, though she uses language all her own, plainer, more homespun. She says that in certain moments of deep prayer, when the soul feels God's nearness with special force, tears well up that don't come from any specific grief, no visible tragedy behind them, no loss to cry over in that instant. And yet they fall, as she describes it herself, as if the body needed to find some physical release for something the soul is living through that words simply can't reach. In The Way of Perfection, written a few years later to instruct her discalced Carmelite nuns, she comes back to this when discussing vocal prayer done with real attention, warning her sisters not to force tears and not to feel embarrassed by them either when they come on their own, because both extremes pull the soul away from what actually matters in prayer. This carries a real weight for understanding what you're hearing tonight. Saint Teresa of Jesus, with the authority of having been declared a doctor of the Church centuries later, in recognition of the theological depth of her experience, confirms, with mystical precision, what the tradition of the gift of tears had been teaching since the earliest monks of the Egyptian desert. There's a kind of weeping that isn't looking for comfort, because it doesn't come from a wound, it comes from an encounter. And that encounter, when it's real, overwhelms the whole body, because the soul, in that moment, is touching something too large to hold in silence. It's worth pausing on something Teresa returns to again and again throughout her writings. The difference between tears the soul forces out, almost as an exercise in manufactured piety, and the tears that just arrive, unannounced, unsought. She treats the first kind with real caution, warning that a soul can mistake its own effort for true grace. The second kind she treats with enormous respect, almost reverence, because in them she recognizes the clear fingerprint of God Himself touching the heart of the one praying. That distinction matters tonight, because the tears you may shed for your own dead, the ones you don't go looking for, don't plan, can't fully control, belong exactly to that second category, the one Teresa learned to recognize as a gift. Now come back to yourself for a moment. Think about the last time you cried remembering someone who's gone. Maybe it was at the Mass on their anniversary. Maybe it was looking at an old photo tucked away in a drawer. Maybe it was just a smell, a song, a street you used to walk together. Was it only sadness you felt? Or was there something else mixed in with the pain? Something close to gratitude, something close to the certainty that the love is still there, even though the person isn't physically with you anymore. If you could sit down and talk with Saint Teresa of Jesus tonight, she'd give you a very specific answer. That mixture you're feeling is exactly how human love, touched by grace, learns to weep without falling into despair. The Interior Castle, written near the end of her life in 1577, goes even deeper into this idea while describing the sixth dwelling place. one of the most advanced states of prayer Teresa managed to put into human words. There she talks in detail about wounds of love that God causes in the soul, wounds that genuinely hurt so deep that the soul wouldn't want them healed, because that very pain, that exact pain, is the clearest sign that God is at work inside it. It's the same paradox that shows up on the grate where Lawrence died. A fire that burns and still doesn't destroy what's essential in the person. A pain that wounds, and yet the soul wouldn't trade it away. This connects directly to the tears popular piety has watched fall from the sky every August 10th. If the fire that consumed Lawrence was really the visible face of a love that no longer fit inside his mortal body, then the tears that same love keeps shedding century after century in the August night sky make a lot more sense than they did at first. They're a sign that the love with which he gave his life keeps overflowing, keeps falling, keeps finding a way to touch the ground where you, this very night, are lifting your eyes upward. Not a sign that heaven is still grieving his. And if those silent tears from the sky are really pure love that's simply overflowing, then your own tears, the ones you shed for your own beloved dead, share that exact same nature. Far from being a crack in your faith or a sign you haven't healed enough, they're the most honest, most human, most Catholic proof that the love you felt for that person is still alive inside you, still looking for a way out to express itself. And that truth, as comforting as it is, opens up a harder, deeper question tonight. If the love of those who've already died is still this alive, what might they, from wherever they are right now, still feel for you? Picture a goldsmith's workshop in deep 16th century Castile, its stone walls blackened by years of smoke. A well-tended forge, the heat rising slowly from the coals until it makes the whole closed-in room shimmer. Over the embers, a small crucible holding a piece of dirty silver, mixed with impurities, dulled by wear. The goldsmith doesn't put that silver in the fire to destroy it. He puts it there to save it from the one thing that's actually ruining it, the grime clinging to it, the tarnish, the stains no cloth or brush could ever scrub away. Only fire, at the exact right temperature, for the exact right stretch of time, can separate what's valuable from what isn't. When the goldsmith pulls the crucible out, the silver comes out brighter, purer, more itself than it was before it ever went into the flames. Saint Teresa of Jesus knew this image well. It was common in the Castile of her day, where religious goldsmithing reached extraordinary levels of craftsmanship in chalices, monstrances, and reliquaries. And she used very similar imagery to describe what she understood about purgatory, that in-between state where the soul, already saved, already certain of its eternal destiny, still needs to be purified of the last traces of disordered attachment before it can look upon God face to face. In the book of her life, chapter 38, Teresa describes visions related to the souls in purgatory and states clearly her conviction that this fire, while real and painful, is fundamentally a fire of love and not one of vengeful punishment. Here's the point the Church has taught firmly for centuries, and that plenty of Catholics, through no fault of their own, have somewhere along the way forgotten. Far from being some antechamber to hell or a place of despair and abandonment, purgatory is, as the Catechism of the Catholic Church describes it in paragraphs 1030 and 1031, a state of final purification for those who die in God's friendship but are still imperfectly purified. It's an expression of divine mercy, not divine anger. God, who has already decided to save that soul, grants it the time and the process it needs to reach heaven completely free of whatever still bound it to the earthly in a disordered way. Go back now to the fire on the grate where Lawrence died. That external fire, brutal, visible, was an instrument of martyrdom. But the interior fire Teresa describes centuries later in her writings, and the purifying fire of purgatory the Church teaches with hope, come from a nature completely different from the cruelty of the Roman executioner. These are fires God allows or brings about precisely because He loves. The goldsmith doesn't hate the silver when he puts it in the crucible. He loves it too much to leave it dirty. God doesn't hate the soul that still needs purifying. He loves it too much to let it into heaven carrying a single stain capable of standing in the way of that eternal union's fullness. Think about your own loved one who's gone, for a moment gently, without fear. If that person died loving God, if they died sorry for their sins, if they died having received the sacraments or at least longing for them with a sincere heart, then whatever process of purification they may be going through right now, if they're going through one at all, has a meaning nowhere close to cruel punishment meant to make them suffer. It's the last stretch of a road that ends with absolute certainty in eternal glory. Saint Teresa of Jesus pressed this point with her own Carmelite sisters whenever one of them lost a family member. That grieving the dead should always come paired with hope, never with despair, because to despair of God's mercy is, according to Catholic doctrine, a serious offense against faith itself. And here's where the image of tears falling from the sky every August 10th comes back with even more force. If those lights represent, in the eyes of popular piety, a martyr's love overflowing century after century, and if that love shares the same nature as the purifying fire working right now, maybe even this very night, on the soul of your own beloved dead, then every falling star can become something far more concrete than a simple astronomical show. It can become a direct, personal invitation made just for you to join your prayer tonight to the purification your loved one may still need to complete before reaching the fullness of heaven. The Church has always taught that the souls in purgatory can't pray for themselves to speed up their own purification. They depend entirely on the charity of those of us still living here on earth. This doctrine, known as the communion of saints, holds that the pilgrim church on earth, the church being purified in purgatory, and the church triumphant in heaven form one single mystical body, where the good done by some genuinely benefits the others. Far from being a nice metaphor with no real effect, this is a truth of faith the Church has defended in ecumenical councils, including the Council of Trent, in the very era when Saint Teresa of Jesus was writing her works in Castile. Every Mass offered for the dead, every rosary prayed for a soul, every act of charity given in someone's name has a real effect, measurable in the spiritual order, even if it's invisible to human eyes. Tonight, this August 10th, while the sky lets its silent tears fall over rooftops and fields, you're holding something in your hands that no telescope on earth, no matter how powerful, could ever show you. The real, concrete possibility of easing, through your own sincere prayer, the final stretch of the road for someone you loved deeply. Someone who, right now, this exact moment, may need exactly what only you, out of everyone in the world, can offer them tonight. St. Ambrose of Milan recorded, in his work on the duties of the clergy, written around the year 390, a precise detail about Lawrence's final days that church tradition has repeated for 1700 years, with barely a change to its core content. When the prefect demanded the gold and silver of the Roman Church, Lawrence answered with a line Ambrose preserved in Latin, one that summed up, in a handful of words, an entire theology of Christian charity. The poor are the true treasure of the Church. He said it, far from any pretty metaphor tossed out to buy himself time, while physically presenting in front of the prefect the elderly, the widows, and the sick he'd gathered that very morning in the public square. The historical detail is concrete. Rome in the 3rd century ran an organized system of assistance to the poor, managed directly by the deacons of each district of the city. Lawrence was responsible for one of those 7 ecclesiastical districts. He kept records, house by house, of who needed bread, who needed clothing for winter, who needed a visit because they were bedridden with no family to care for them. That detailed knowledge, that living memory of every face in need, is exactly what let him gather that entire line of people in 3 days in answer to the prefect's demand. There was barely time to walk Rome at night knocking on doors, let alone room to prepare some elaborate speech. Now sit with what this idea of treasure means when you apply it directly to your own daily life. The prefect of Rome was after gold, silver, things with market value, things you can weigh, sell, put behind glass. Lawrence showed him people instead. He showed him that the real worth of the church was never in what you could lock away, but in what you could love. That distinction, which must have looked like a desperate provocation from a man about to die, became over the centuries one of the most repeated principles in Catholic social teaching. The dignity of the human person outweighs any material value, no matter how great. And here's the question you probably haven't asked yourself yet tonight, this August 10th. If the poor were Lawrence's treasure, who's the treasure of your own life? For nearly everyone listening to this right now, the answer doesn't take much thought. It's the ones who are gone. The parents, the grandparents, the spouses, the children, the siblings who've already crossed over and who, even so, still hold the most valuable place in your heart. Nobody locks away the memory of a father in a safe. Nobody puts a mother's love on display behind glass. And yet that memory, that love, weighs infinitely more than any object you could ever gather in a lifetime. Saint Teresa of Jesus understood this same order of values with a clarity that runs through her entire body of work. In the book of her Foundations, she describes giving up material comforts and financial security over and over, turning down the stability she could have had by staying put in one well-established convent, choosing instead to spend her whole life founding new houses where other women could seek God freely. She herself wrote that she'd rather have a poor cell with real prayer in it than a palace without it. The treasure she was after was never material. It was always relational. The soul seeking God and God going out to meet that soul. It's worth pausing on how Teresa lived out this conviction in the daily life of her convents. She insisted her nuns not pile up unnecessary belongings, that they share what little they had, that they see in every poor sister a reflection of the same Christ Lawrence had recognized in the elderly and widows of Rome. In The Way of Perfection, she gives whole chapters over to explaining why detachment from material goods makes room, almost naturally, for something deeper still. Detachment from one's own will, so the soul is free and open to God's love. This kind of poverty, far from impoverishing her communities, filled them with something she considered far more valuable: the interior freedom needed to love without conditions. That same logic applies, with a force you may never have considered quite this clearly before, to your own beloved dead. The treasure they represent can't be weighed or sold, but it asks something of you just as concrete as the gold the prefect of Rome demanded from Lawrence. It asks for your constant, sincere prayer. It asks for your active memory, not just the passive kind that surfaces every once in a while, unbidden and unsought. It asks that you do for them, deliberately, what Lawrence did for the poor of Rome in his last 3 days on earth. Seek them out patiently, name them, present them before God, with the absolute certainty that this act carries a value no material treasure could ever match. Think about this the next time you look up at the sky tonight, this August 10th, unhurried, letting your gaze get lost among the stars that appear and vanish. Every light that falls can remind you that the real treasure was never up there, shining out of reach, but in the living memory of the people you loved deeply, who now depend, in a very concrete way, on your steady prayer to complete their own journey toward the eternal fullness we're all hoping to reach one day. And if that quiet treasure deserves your full attention tonight, this exact August 10th, then it's worth knowing clearly what to do, step by step, with that thought before the sun fully rises, before the sky finishes, letting its last tears fall over the sleeping rooftops of your whole city. Do this tonight, this very night, calmly, if you can still find a free moment for it. Step out to the patio, the balcony, your own window, anywhere quiet where you can see a patch of dark sky. You don't need a telescope or a special lookout point. The Perseids are visible to the naked eye. Better the farther you are from city lights, better after midnight, once the constellation Perseus climbs higher over the horizon. But even if you live in an apartment in the middle of a big city, even if all you can see is a small rectangle of sky between two buildings, that's enough. What matters tonight is what you do with your heart while you wait, far more than how many shooting stars you manage to count. Before you go out, take a moment to write down, even just in your mind, the names of your dead. All the ones you can remember, the ones who died recently and the ones who died decades ago, the ones with a funeral packed full of mourners, and the ones who slipped away quietly, barely noticed by anyone. Every name matters exactly the same before God. There's no hierarchy in how God loves souls, even though we, down here on earth, sometimes forget the ones who died longer ago while we're still grieving the ones we lost more recently. Once you're under the sky, pray. You don't need an elaborate prayer or some complicated formula. For this exact intention, the Church offers some of the oldest and most beautiful prayers in the whole Catholic tradition. The eternal rest, which goes, "Eternal rest grant unto them, O Lord, and let perpetual light shine upon them. May they rest in peace. Amen." This short prayer, repeated for centuries by generation after generation of Catholics, carries the added value of being tied to indulgences applicable to the souls in purgatory when prayed under the right conditions, according to the Church's current norms on indulgences. If you'd rather do something longer, you can pray a full rosary, offering each mystery for your dead. You can pray the litany of the dead, still kept in the old missals of plenty of parishes. Or you can simply talk to them in your own words. Tell them what's happened in your life since the last time you spoke. Say the things you never worked up the courage to say while they were still here. Prayer for the dead doesn't demand a perfect formula. It demands sincerity. Many families, following a custom still widely kept in villages across Spain and the Americas, use this night of August 10th to light a candle for each of their dead, setting it in a window or on a small improvised home altar. You don't need anything expensive, no elaborate decoration. A simple candle is enough, a photograph if you have one, and a few minutes of real silence in front of that small flame while, outside, the other lights fall. The ones popular piety calls the tears of St. Lawrence. Some families also make time to visit the cemetery, if the hour and the distance allow it, leaving fresh flowers on the grave while they pray quietly. If you have children or grandchildren with you tonight, this can be a beautiful moment to pass on, naturally and without any heaviness, the Catholic faith in eternal life and the communion of saints. Tell them who the great-grandfather was, the aunt, the brother who's no longer here. Explain, in words suited to their age, why the family prays for them tonight while watching the stars fall. Faith often gets passed down exactly like this, through one small, concrete gesture, far more than through long, abstract explanations of theology. Consider also having a Mass offered for your dead in the coming days, if you haven't done so recently. The Mass is, according to the firmest Catholic teaching, the most powerful form of intercession there is for the souls in purgatory, because in it, the very sacrifice of Christ becomes present, applied in a special way to the intention for which it's offered. A small donation to your parish, along with your loved one's name, is enough for the priest to include that intention in the celebration. Far from being some meaningless bit of paperwork, it's quite literally putting the greatest sacrifice ever offered to work for the soul you loved. If you have a real chance this week, consider also doing a concrete work of charity in specific memory of your beloved dead. It can be a sincere donation, a visit to someone who's sick, an hour of your time given to someone who needs it. Remember in detail what Lawrence taught with his whole life. The poor are a treasure God pays special attention to and holds dear, and any act of charity done in a dead, loved one's name becomes, according to the Church's traditional piety, a spiritual bridge between what you do here on earth and whatever relief that person may need in their process of purification. And tonight, while you wait under the sky for the next star to fall, let yourself feel whatever you need to feel. If tears come tonight, don't hold them back. You know now, after everything you've listened to so carefully, that those tears share the same nature as the ones tradition attributes to the very martyr whose feast is being celebrated tonight. Far from being weakness, they're the most honest way human love has of showing itself when words fall short. Let them fall alongside the lights in the sky. Let both, your own and the ones popular piety so lovingly calls the tears of St. Lawrence, fall together tonight over that same quiet earth, forming where no one else will ever see it, a single current of love reaching straight up toward the open sky. Why are you still crying so much when I'm all right now? Imagine for a moment that you could ask your own loved one this exact question tonight, and that they could answer you with the same plain honesty they used to talk to you with in life. No dressing it up, no formalities. What do you think they'd say? Probably something close to what Lawrence from heaven would say to anyone who still wonders why the sky keeps pouring out light in his name every August 10th. I'm not crying because I'm suffering. I'm crying because the love I felt on earth is still real, still alive, still mine, and it still needs a way to reach you. This imagined conversation, far from being some empty flight of fancy, actually reflects at bottom exactly what the whole Catholic tradition on the communion of saints holds with complete theological seriousness. Death doesn't break the bond of love, it transforms it. The ones in heaven and the ones still being purified on their way there stay united to us in a way that's real, even if invisible, even if as quiet as a shooting star falling through the dark of an August night. Now come back one last time tonight to the central question that opened this whole journey. Why does the sky weep stars on August 10th, year after year, without fail? The answer doesn't need any more detours or extra explaining. The sky isn't weeping out of sadness. It's weeping because a man who loved to the very end, who gave his whole life without holding a single thing back for himself, keeps overflowing with that love century after century, and no calendar, no war, no human forgetting has ever managed to stop it. And that exact same truth, without a single exception, applies to your own people. The love of your father, your mother, your husband, your beloved child didn't end when their life here on earth ended. It just found another quieter way to keep falling toward you night after night, whether or not you always noticed it clearly. Saint Teresa of Jesus, who spent her whole life trying to understand the paths God's love travels inside the human soul, would have recognized this truth instantly in the lights of August. She herself wrote more than once that true love never sits still. It's always looking for a way out, an expression, some concrete gesture that makes it visible in the world. The fire that consumed Lawrence, the fire she herself felt burning in her own soul during prayer, and the tears you shed for your own dead tonight, are three different faces of a single reality. God's love, which never stops moving, never stops searching for hearts willing to receive it and pass it on to others. It's worth pausing on something Teresa lived out herself toward the end of her life, when illness and exhaustion followed her through nearly every day of the work of founding new convents all across Castile. In more than one letter to her sisters, she admitted that tears visited her often, moved less by discouragement over the hardships of the road than by an overflowing gratitude toward God, a gratitude she didn't know how else to put into words. That same woman who endured exhausting travel, opposition from her superiors, long illnesses, and persecution from within her own order, kept weeping out of love right up to her final days, as if her body, however tired it grew, never lost the capacity to overflow in the presence of God. That example, lived out by a real woman with a name and a history in a real 16th century Castile, backs up with her whole life everything you've been hearing tonight about the true meaning of tears. Think for a moment about how many August 10ths there have been since the year 258. About 1,768 of them. 1,768 times the sky has let its lights fall over the earth without missing a single one, never once growing tired with no generation, no matter how advanced its science, ever managing to fully explain it or shut it off. And tonight, this particular night, joins that immense chain of nights, identical and yet completely unique to you, because it's the only night where you, exactly as you are right now, with your own dead, with your own exact story, are looking up at this very instant. You'll probably forget the precise historical details tomorrow, about Lawrence, about Ambrose, about the Perseids and their exact orbit around the sun. That's completely normal. Human memory works that way, sorting and discarding as the days go by. But there's something you probably won't forget so easily. The concrete feeling of having understood, even just for one night, that the tears falling from the sky and the ones falling from your own eyes share the same origin, the same dignity, the same deep hope. That crying for the ones you loved was never weakness. That this kind of crying, far from pulling you away from God, draws you closer to the oldest, most honest way a human being has of continuing to love the ones they can no longer hold with their arms, but can still hold in prayer. Tonight, when the last star falls and dawn begins to wipe the dark sky away, something will have shifted in you, even if it's small, quiet, almost impossible to point to. You'll have spent this night looking up in silence, recognizing in every falling light a personal message written for you 1700 years ago, something far more than a curious astronomical show, renewed without fail every August 10th, right up until this very night, when you finally understood why the sky weeps. You know it now, with a clarity you didn't have before tonight. Every time you lift your eyes to the August sky and watch a quiet light fall, you'll remember the name of a Roman deacon who gave his whole life without holding back a single thing. And you'll remember too that this same love, turned into a fire that purifies without destroying, is still alive, still at work, still laboring this very night on the souls of the people you loved and can no longer hold with your arms. You know now that the tears that sometimes catch you off guard when you think of your father, your mother, your husband, your child, aren't a sign of weakness or a lack of faith. They're the oldest, most honest way the human heart has of showing a love too alive to stay quiet. They share the same nature as the tears generation after generation of faithful people have watched fall from the sky every August 10th. They don't come from despair. They come from a love still searching for a way out. You also know something far more practical and valuable now, that you're holding tonight the real, concrete possibility of easing the purification of someone you loved. A sincere prayer, a mass offered in their name, a small act of charity done in their memory. These carry a real effect, measurable in the spiritual order, even if no telescope could ever show it to you. Saint Teresa of Jesus, with the authority of a whole life spent understanding the paths of God's love, confirms tonight what the Church has always taught, with hope and without fear. That death doesn't break the bonds that truly matter, that the communion of saints is a living reality, not some abstract idea tucked away in a book. If you stayed with this all the way to this moment, listening to every word in the dark of your own home, it's because something inside you needed to hear exactly this. You needed to know that your grief for the ones who are gone has meaning, has dignity, even has a kind of power you may never have considered before. You needed to find, in the story of a martyr burned 1700 years ago, and in the words of a Castilian nun who wrote about the fire of the soul, a new reason to keep looking at the sky with hope instead of resignation. Tonight, this August 10th, while the lights keep falling over rooftops and fields, you won't see them anymore as just an astronomical event that science explains with mathematical precision. You'll see them for what they really are, to anyone looking with the eyes of faith. An annual reminder, punctual, faithful, that the love Lawrence gave on the Roman grate keeps overflowing century after century, and that the love of your own dead is every bit as alive, still looking for a way to reach you tonight. Before you go on with your night, I want to ask you for something very specific, something you might never have thought to do quite this directly before. Think of the full name of the person you miss most tonight, this August 10th, first and last name, the way it would appear on their official documents, the way you'd write it in a formal letter, setting aside the vague, generic memory you sometimes settle for without even noticing. Close your eyes for a moment and say that full name quietly, even if you're alone in your room, even if no one else can hear you right now. The saints, according to the oldest Catholic tradition, listen with special attention to names spoken in real love, because every name carries a whole story, an actual face, a full life that deserves to be lived and deserves to keep being remembered with all its dignity intact. Now think about what you've learned tonight, about Lawrence, about the fire that purifies without destroying, about the tears Saint Teresa of Jesus described with such precision in her writings. All of this knowledge exists for a purpose that goes far beyond historical curiosity or interest in a quaint old tradition. It's meant to walk with you, to hold you up, to give you real tools for continuing to care spiritually for the people you can no longer care for with your own hands. And that companionship doesn't end tonight. It continues every time you need to understand a little more about the life beyond, about purgatory, about the hope the Church offers to anyone grieving their dead in faith. There's something you might not know yet, something that can become a deeply comforting spiritual habit if you let it. Every teaching about Saint Teresa of Jesus you've received so far, every story of the saints, every doctrinal explanation of eternal life is part of one continuous path, built specifically for people who, like you, feel a deep devotion to their dead and want to better understand the Catholic faith they inherited from their own parents and grandparents. This path doesn't run out in a single night or a single video watched start to finish. Every new teaching opens a different door onto the same unshakable certainty that love between people who truly love each other never ends. It only changes shape, only finds new ways to keep showing itself. Maybe tonight you're wondering what else you could learn about Saint Teresa's visions, about the saints who walked alongside her on her spiritual path, about the concrete practices the Church recommends for helping the souls in purgatory through their final process of purification. That question that just crossed your mind is, at its heart, exactly the kind of question that deserves a full, detailed answer, built with the same rigorous doctrinal care that went into everything you've just heard tonight. Far more than some passing coincidence with no real weight to it. And that answer is waiting for you right now, very close to wherever you happen to be sitting or standing this very moment, ready for you to keep walking tonight, a little further down the same road you've already started on. Think too about the people you love who are still with you, the ones who share this same faith with you, this same devotion to Saint Teresa, this same loving concern for the family's dead. Share what you learned tonight with them. Tell them about the tears of Saint Lawrence, about the fire that purifies, about the old custom of looking up at the sky every August 10th, thinking of the ones who are gone. So often, faith gets passed down exactly like that, generation after generation, through simple conversations around a table, a patio, a window with a view of the starry sky. far more than through long, solemn speeches nobody remembers the next day. And if tonight stirred up new questions in you about what happens after death, about how to better help your dead, about what other teachings Saint Teresa of Jesus left behind for anyone walking through grief in faith, don't let those questions burn out like a shooting star crossing the sky and vanishing in a second. Chase them down. Look for the answers. Every new teaching you take in strengthens your grasp of Catholic doctrine, and alongside it, your real ability to spiritually help the people you love, who today depend, more than ever, on the faith with which you remember them. This moment, this exact night of August 10th, with the sky falling in silent lights over your city and so many sister cities besides, is just one point on a much longer road you're building for yourself, night after night, teaching after teaching, prayer after prayer, unhurried but unstopping. Don't let it end here. Let the next screen that appears in front of you carry you one step further down that same road, toward another truth. Saint Teresa of Jesus also left, written for anyone who, like you, is looking for real comfort and not just pretty words with nothing behind them. Because the love you feel for your dead deserves to be fed with real knowledge, with solid doctrine, with stories that hold up over time, as well as Lawrence's faith held up in the middle of a fire that should have destroyed him and instead never managed to put out what was essential in who he was. Now, before I say goodbye, stay with me in silence a little longer. Let the sky keep falling outside, unhurried, without you needing to count every light that appears. Just breathe. Just feel one more moment the quiet weight of everything you've taken in tonight. Saint Teresa of Jesus wrote near the end of her life that a soul who has truly learned to love God no longer fears death, because it has discovered that death is nothing more than a step toward the final meeting with the one it loves most. That same certainty, that same rest, I wish for you tonight, as you think of your own dead and the road they're still walking toward eternal fullness. Don't leave here carrying anguish. Leave with the peace of knowing that your love, your tears, your prayer tonight carry a real value that no cloudy sky, no city lit up bright, no earthly obstacle can ever stop from reaching where it's meant to go. August 10th will keep coming back year after year, and every time it does, you'll know how to look up with an understanding you didn't have before. May God bless you abundantly this particular night. May He bless one by one each of your beloved dead, the ones you named quietly a moment ago, and the ones you might have, without meaning to, left out. May St. Lawrence intercede for them with all his strength from the heaven where he now rests forever. May Saint Teresa of Jesus, Doctor of the Church and spiritual mother to so many devoted souls across the centuries, walk with your prayer tonight and every quiet night you still have left to live on this earth. Rest in peace tonight, if tonight happens to be the night you say goodbye to these words. And rest too with that same peace, in the certainty that love never stops falling, never stops looking for you, never stops finding a way to reach you. Good night, and rest easy. May the sky, tonight and always, keep weeping out of love over your own home.